What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are officially getting into Infinity Countdown Prime #1. And in truth, where the Infinity Countdown Adam Warlock story just kind of showed us where Adam Warlock was, Infinity Countdown Prime actually gives us the Infinity Stones. And it's basically like this race for the Infinity Stones. So for those of you guys who read like Thanos Quest, imagine that story. But instead of it just being Thanos, it's like a bunch of people trying to find the Infinity Stones and gain them for themselves. Now, the cool thing about this, and this is something that I want you guys to notice as we kind of kick this off, is that the Infinity Stones, historically speaking, in terms of their purpose and the role they've played, has almost always been consistent. The only change, the only fluctuation that came with the Infinity Stones was like their color. But one of the other big changes here, and this is actually a pretty significant deviation, is the Reality Stone. Historically speaking, the Reality Stone allowed a user to manipulate the fabric of reality, but it didn't allow them to do anything they wanted to. Like, you couldn't use the Reality Stone to read everyone's minds, or you couldn't use the Reality Stone to like travel back and forth through time. That was the kind of caveat that Jim Starlin and guys like Roy Thomas and so on created when they created the Infinity Stones. What the Reality Stone can now do in Marvel Comics is it can allow an individual to access the multiverse. And again, that was never the case. You were never able to access the multiverse before. One of the things that was established really in like a handful of different stories over the years, it was established in JLA versus Avengers, I think, and it was established in like Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. The Infinity Gauntlet only works in its native reality. So if, for example, you took the Infinity Gauntlet from the main Marvel universe and then you went to like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it wouldn't work. It would just be a glove with some gems on it, and that would be about it. It would look really fancy, and you could probably pawn it, but like there wouldn't be anything that you'd be able to do with it in terms of like using its power. Now from here, I want to jump into the main story itself, because what this does is it initially picks up with classic Wolverine. And the reason why I say classic is classic Wolverine died in the Death of Wolverine storyline. There were actually two versions. There's two versions that you need to be aware of. The first is by Greg Rucka, and I cannot remember for the life of me who it was that wrote the second one. Actually, now that I think about it, it was Charles Soule. That's who it was that wrote the Death of Wolverine. But it was basically a way for Marvel to like get rid of Wolverine. And in its place, they gave us like Old Man Logan. Old Man Logan basically moved into the main Marvel universe after the events of Secret Wars. What we got with the Marvel Legacy one-shot is we basically got the return of classic Wolverine. We didn't really know how he came back. We just know that he did. And he was basically sporting the Space Stone. So it was kind of like, okay, like how in the world did he get his hands on that? Now, the idea here is that he's just kind of been meandering around. And Marvel's been covering that. I think it was supposed to be in the back of every single comic, but I think it's only in the back of select comics where you basically figure out like what it is that classic Wolverine's been doing. And it's supposed to come to a head, I think, with the actual like Infinity Countdown, the Grand Poobah story, the big summer event, is when you're supposed to get like that one shot that basically takes all those little mini reveals and then puts them all into a single story, which is actually a pretty cool idea. But the fact remains, classic Wolverine has just kind of been roaming around the Marvel universe, and that's really about it. But he's basically tracked down by Ultron's drones, is really the best way to think about it. Now, the one thing to bear in mind here when it comes to Ultron is you have the main Ultron robot, and then you have the Ultron drones. The fact that Ultron is basically an AI that's just kind of become self-aware and basically became Skynet is a way for Marvel to kind of bring his character back time and time again, but it's also a way for Marvel to use his character in interesting ways. For example, Annihilation Conquest was when Ultron took over the Phalanx, basically a cybernetic race of beings, and then in turn tried to conquer the universe. So it was a cool story in terms of how that happened, but it was the idea that Ultron basically just kind of has drones that go about and do his bidding. Now, Wolverine's fought Ultron enough in the past to be well aware of what it is that's happening, but as far as I'm aware, these are not like adamantium drones. And Wolverine makes pretty quick work of them. I mean, Ultron's kind of watching all this unfold, and this is just one of those circumstances where Ultron had basically just grabbed various organisms and then just kind of imprinted itself onto them, and then they basically became drones for him. But, almost immediately after these drones are basically eradicated, we end up having the arrival of Loki. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with what's going on in Loki and Doctor Strange, please do not spoil anything because we will cover that. But the fact remains here, it's kind of funny because when Loki first pops up, he actually slashes Wolverine across the face and it's just like, hey, I just want to make sure it's you. And like, if you heal yourself, then like, we'll know it's you. And then Wolverine stabs him through the head and it's like, hey man, I just want to make sure it's you. It's one of those funny exchanges the two of them have because remember, despite the fact that we might find it entertaining, historically speaking in Marvel Comics, Wolverine hates Loki. Like he absolutely despises Loki. So it was kind of funny to see the two of them interact and sort of mess with each other. Now, of course, Wolverine's kind of going on and doing his own thing. We don't really know exactly what he's trying to do. We just know he has a space stone, and that's really about it. But again, the idea is to kind of keep it from falling into the wrong hands. Now, this is pretty smart, because remember, when it comes to the Infinity Stones, if the wrong person gets, any one of the stones, then they can basically unify them. That's one of the things that was established in Brian Michael Bendis's Illuminati miniseries. We found out when Reed Richards basically first gained one of the Infinity Stones that the stones want to come back together. They want to be unified. So if you capture one, you should be able to find all the others. And so Loki's advice here is, look, man, be careful walking around with that stone, because if you have it, other people will come for it. At this point, we actually pick up with a guy named Turk Barrett. Turk Barrett was originally introduced back in 1970 with Daredevil issue number 69, and he's one of those street level characters that's just been around. He's been like a henchman, he's been an information broker, he's been a middleman, he's been an errand runner, but he was never like a super significant character. But somewhere along the line, Turk Barrett managed to get his hands on the Mind Stone. We have no earthly clue how it was that he got a hold of this, we just know that he did. But again, this is designed to basically say that if a person's in possession of a stone, they will use it for any number of means. And this sort of narration that we get here is that it's in the nature of humanity to be that way. Every single time we've seen the Infinity Stones in Marvel Comics, it's always gone that way. I mean, even if you look at like the Illuminati miniseries, the Illuminati one-shot, or I guess really one of the stories of the 5 stories that were there, when Reed Richards brought the Infinity Gauntlet together, originally when the Watcher showed up and said like, you have to put it down, like you have to get rid of the Infinity Gauntlet, Reed didn't want to. He didn't want to dismantle it. Charles Xavier made him do it. He basically used his mental powers and like trick the mind of Reed Richards in order to make him like say, okay, well, yeah, I guess I should get rid of it. Even the most staunch of individuals can be corrupted by the Infinity Gauntlet. The only exception to that I can think of really was 2 instances. One was Iron Man and the other was Captain America. With Iron Man, it was like a one-shot story, I think it was. With Captain America, it was in Avengers, a New Avengers, basically when they tried to stop the incursions and he used the Infinity Gauntlet and was like, oh my God, this is so much power. And ultimately it didn't work and the stone shattered. But even then, it was for like maybe 10 seconds that he actually had the gauntlet on his hand. The other half of this, and this is where things get kind of a little weird here, is we switch over to like Carol Danvers with the Reality Stone. But we also get like basically Monica Rambeau. We get like, Captain Marvel, and the image kind of goes on and on. It's kind of like one of these things where it sort of cascades off panel itself. And the indication is that the Reality Stone exists in like all these different realities, or basically it was Carol Danvers hopping from universe to universe or something along those lines. We're not really given an explicit definition here. It is kind of weird, but it's really just kind of like a splash page designed to say the Reality Stone allows its user to basically tap into other universes, to essentially access other universes. Now, we also know what's going on with the Power Stone, right? Like we covered that in the Guardians of the Galaxy story, where we basically dealt with like the return of Adam Warlock, different things like that. And the idea is that the Power Stone is now this massive rock. It's kind of an interesting thing when it comes to that. But again, people are on the hunt for it. Like people are searching around for these various artifacts. For example, we end up coming across the Super Skrull, who it looks like he's in possession of the Time Stone. And this is cool because Super Skrull is a character that we haven't seen in quite some time. For those of you guys who don't know, Super Skrull is a guy named Clerk. He's literally a Skrull. But the difference between him and other Skrulls is he basically has all the powers of the Fantastic Four. He can access those powers and transform himself into any one of the Fantastic Four, or use all their powers at the same time if he wants to. So it's kind of interesting. But much like a lot of the Skrulls that exist out there, because of the fact that the race has kind of waxed and waned over the years, in the sense that there's been a lot of social upheavals and civil wars, and there's been massive conflicts, and the Skrulls have been defeated, and their planet was destroyed by Galactus, the idea of Super Skrull is to say, I will return the Empire to its glory, meaning he will use a time stone to travel back in time, and at some point along the line, correct things that had gone wrong. Now, in truth, the introduction of the Time Stone, or kind of like the reintroduction of the Time Stone into the Marvel Comics universe right now, is actually pretty significant, because what would happen if someone got a hold of the Time Stone and then went back before Secret Wars happened and basically said, hey guys, so here's what's causing the whole collapse of the multiverse. Like, what if somebody decided to go all the way back and basically stop Secret Wars from happening, or stop Doctor Doom from like defeating the Beyonders, or basically explain everything to Reed Richards? There's a lot of possibilities. The cool thing about the Time Stone is that the Time Stone is basically a gateway to like a reboot if Marvel wanted to. Of course, we also have Adam Warlock, who finally emerges from his imprisonment, like we discussed in the whole Adam Warlock story. Again, that's the idea here, is this kind of this notion that like a lot of people are chasing after the stones. Thanos, of course, is on the hunt for the Infinity Stones because, it's an Infinity Stone story, and what would an Infinity Stone story be without Thanos? So, I mean, you got to have him in there somewhere. somewhere. But we also get this really cool moment where we actually end up having Ego the Living Planet that's not necessarily talking directly with the Magus, but kind of having a bit of kind of observing everything that's going on. Now, the Magus is interesting in Marvel Comics, and a lot of people are not really familiar with him. We talked about him in our video on Adam Warlock, and to keep it really short here, to sum it up in 10 seconds, the Magus is basically like an alternate reality future version of Adam Warlock. It's basically what would happen if Adam Warlock became a bad guy. And the idea was that Adam Warlock wants to reattain the Soul Gem, because remember, when it comes to like Adam Warlock, when it comes to the Magus, they're kind of part and parcel to the Soul Gem itself. The Magus came into existence because of like prolonged exposure to the Soul Gem by Adam Warlock. At the same time, Adam Warlock has been confined inside Soul World, which is in the Soul Stone. So by one measure or another, each character is basically tightly intertwined with the nature of the Soul Stone itself. But for the Magus, what he's actually doing here is having a conversation with the Contemplator. Now, the Contemplator is one of the elders of the universe, basically one of the last surviving member of his own race. The Contemplator is a guy who basically realized that if he's in tune with himself in perfect harmony, he can actually jump from one universe to another using an astral form. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, that's his little caveat thing. But having been in existence for like billions of years, he's got untold wisdom. And it's kind of cool with the Magus talking to it, because the Magus is trying to find out where the Soul Stone is. The problem is that with him having it in his possession, he's immediately attacked and killed by Ultron. And so this is kind of interesting because Magus is out of the picture now. And honestly, I would have made the gamble and said, the Magus is the one who's basically doing all this. The Magus is the one who's basically gathering all the Infinity Stones. He's going to be the main villain. It seems like one of these things where Marvel's trying to avoid that. That's what happened in Infinity War. The Magus, the evil version of Adam Warlock, started gathering all the Infinity Stones. We formed the Infinity Gauntlet and had all the cosmic cubes from like these different universes and so on and so forth. It was pandemonium, but Marvel's already done this dance once before. And so it wouldn't make any sense to do the dance all over again. You got to move on to a different dance. And so that's kind of the cool thing here. And the funny thing about this is that what ends up happening is that when it comes to the Contemplator talking to, Pym-Tron, really is what we can kind of call him, he simply says, look, you don't know what you're getting into by wielding this thing. And it's true. It's true because Pym-Tron's never held the Soul Stone before. One thing to keep in mind, if you hold the Soul Stone long enough, if you have it in your possession long enough and you do not guard yourself adequately, it will start siphoning off your soul. And so eventually your soul will reside inside the Soul Stone. You'll never be able to get out. And that's exactly what happens here. In this instance, we basically end up finding out that where there's this kind of psychic backlash, basically, this kind of feedback where a portion of Pym-Tron's soul is literally yanked inside of the Soul Stone itself. We end up having Hank Pym being the one who's confined in there, essentially meaning that Pym-Tron seems to be 100% Ultron now. And Hank Pym himself is just confined inside of the Soul Stone, where he's ultimately met with the soul of Gamora, another counterpart to the Gamora that kind of runs around right now. And this counterpart simply says, you're stuck in here forever now. There's no conceivable way for you to get out. Now, Adam Warlock could enter into Soul World and he could take their souls and bring them out. There's a lot of ways for them to be able to get out. But notice this, they've been aging. That's the difference here. Gamora has been aging since she's been in here. She's grown older. Time has passed inside of Soul World. Something else that I also want you guys to notice too is that this depiction of Soul World is historically vastly different from the way that it used to be. In Marvel Comics, Soul World has always been depicted as this sort of idyllic paradise, effectively heaven for the most part. And there's just complete and total peace. There's no war, no conflict, no anything like that. So if your soul gets locked away, it's actually not the worst place to be. In this instance, it's kind of depicted as being like a barren landscape. Now, I don't know if that's meant to hit at anything, or I don't know if that's just the current depiction of the Soul World by, the artist of the story. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, it could mean nothing. It could mean everything. I don't know. But what this does is this leads directly into the main Infinity Countdown story, going into the story and the huge summer event that kind of, concludes in July and so on and so forth. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.